I wanted to delve into the concepts of what is the justification for private property, what it is and how it works, and how that leads to the exploitation of people. But before I jump into that, I just wanted to comment on what I'm wearing. So I'm wearing what, I don't know what a fedora is, but this is the closest thing I could find to what I think it is. So anarcho-capitalists are very fond of trying to use the word anarchist and trying to steal away anarchist concepts. So in a counterattack, I'm going to call myself an Ancap from now on and dress like an Ancap. Ancaps for me, of course, means anti-capitalist. I am an Ancap. I am an anti-capitalist. But what is the proprietarian argument for private property? What is the justification for one person owning hundreds of properties located all over the place that other people use and have to pay rents to the owner for? The creation myth of the proprietarians, their sort of Adam and Eve story, is that private property came about because people would mix their labour with the land. And because you own yourself and you own your labour, you should get to keep the fruit of your labour. So if you're mixing yourself with the land, part of yourself, you're putting your energy in it, you should keep that land because you mix part of yourself with the land. Now, like a lot of religions, the creation myth simply didn't happen. Most of the property and land was stolen through genocidal conquests, like in the Americas or Australia. But the proprietarians will turn around and quite often they'll say stuff like, oh, there's no clear definition between personal property and private property. Where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line?
Private property is a property regime where individuals can own an infinite amount of property. Private property is conceptually different from personal property. Personal property being the property that you physically interact with. So your house, your car, your clothes. While private property means that an individual can have exclusive rights over property they don't physically interact with, like a house, a factory, a mine, 100 houses, and use violence to restrict other people's access to that property unless they pay accordingly. Usually this violence happens via the state, which is an interesting side point, seeing that most liberal economics thinks that the state and the market are somehow separate entities, even though the state is responsible for upholding this property regime of private property. Usually when people hear the phrase private property, they conceptualize personal property. Often when I question private property online, people will say stuff like, yeah, you're against private property. How about you come onto my land and try and take it away from me, you filthy communist? And they'll upload a picture of someone holding a shotgun. And the reason they do this is because they think you're questioning personal property. I'm not trying to say that people shouldn't have rights over the house they're occupying. I'm saying people shouldn't have rights over people's houses that they're not occupying. You know, how do you really intend to defend your private property with a shotgun? Are you going to drive around from property to property that could be miles or hundreds of miles apart from each other in a car with a shotgun, constantly going around patrolling? No, you couldn't possibly enforce that. That's why private property relies on a state apparatus to defend itself. And that's why it's absurd whenever liberal economists or defenders of liberal economics pretend that capitalism is a system somehow different from statism. They rely on the state to defend their private property regimes. And so in order for people to have a better conceptual understanding of the difference between personal property and private property, I think people should start using the term personal empire when referring to private property. Because a personal empire would be having control over 100 people's homes.
But it's interesting how the proprietarians, they always attack this idea that personal property versus private property is this really unclear distinction. Well, what about your homesteading creation myth? Isn't that a bit vague? Like, how much labor do you actually have to mix with the land before it's yours? Like, if I go down to the beach and I make a sandcastle, do I get rights over the beach because I've mixed my labor with the land? There, the beach is mine now. I have mixed my labor with the land.
mate. Get out of my fucking property, mate. All right, you're trespassing here, mate. Non-aggression principle.
One of the reasons why private property is inherently authoritarian is when you live in a society that is completely privately owned, all the houses, the food production, the food distribution, things that people need to access, because even if you own yourself is intrinsically part of the environment. You're an eating, shitting animal. Human exists within the context of an environment, not a vacuum. You can't just own yourself and then float in space for infinity. You need to access the environment. And so if you're born and you don't own property and you're part of the non-property owning class of people, in order to access the means of life, which is owned by the property owning class of people, the only way you can access it is by entering onto their terms. Usually it means you have to pay them. And then what are you going to pay them with? Well, to get money, you have to sell the only thing you do own, yourself, for a wage. Now, when you're working for a capitalist, the productivity of your labor, what you produce, or the service you create, is owned by the capitalist. They own the service or the product, and at the end of the day or the week or when they pay you, they'll give you a portion of the value of what you've created back to you. Your wages couldn't buy the product or the services you've created, otherwise it wouldn't be profitable for the capitalist. That gap in between your wages and the profits are called the surplus value. So the non-property owning class is actually generating capital or value or wealth, working for the property owning class, in which they take that capital and they use it to expand their personal empires. So effectively, the non-property owning class is empowering the property owning class. Is that all of it?
Yeah.
Alright, don't be late. Alright?
Okay.
Because I'll have to evict you from my property if you're late. Alright?